Nicholas, so I got to be Nicholas Peter.
I'm so excited today to have Nicholas P. Checker on my show, Stories Worth Telling. And if you know Nick, you know that you've got a story to hear and a story that's worth listening to, and he definitely has a story worth telling. Nick is an amazing historian, just does his research and then brings about these amazing stories. So he's written to date 4 novels and a novelette, and you'll see him about town. He teaches classes, so we have so much to talk about. So welcome, Nick. Let's get started.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Kate. Thanks for having me here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being here. So you've been published and you've gotten some awards recently, too. What was your most recent award?
Oh, well, the award was the grant that I got last year to take my play that was done at the Eugene O'Neill Theater many years ago, Elegy for an Icon, which was about the Pequot War, and it was triggered by the controversy over the statue of Major John Mason. And the play was performed there, again, many, many years ago at the local Playwrights Festival. And then it was done repeatedly, and then it became part of my writing past until the issue surfaced again about Major Mason's statue. So, and because there was a lot of attention being given to it, but not a lot of that attention was responsible or accurate. And I figured if people are going to make decisions about something that took place 3.5 centuries ago, they should learn a little more about it.
So what was unfolded? What were you able to dig up and write the truth about history? I think history is so important, and we don't necessarily have the right history in the history books. I'm on the Board of Education in East Lyme, and we talk about that a lot. Like, what are we teaching our kids?
Well, what I did was I researched everything that was ever written on the Pequot War, and the staple of my research was Dr. Kevin McBride. He was the tribal archaeologist for the Mashantuckets for a number of years, the original director of the museum, but most significantly, associate professor of anthropology at the University of Connecticut, where he still is. And Kevin literally digs up the past. And he had done so much research on it, not only reading the primary documentation, which he passed all this on to me, but his diggings.
What do you mean, anthropological, actual digging?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, he's done excavations through this whole area and discovered a lot of what actually took place, but he did it objectively. He did it without bias, without angle, without trying to influence people one way or the other. And so I continued in that vein. When I did my research, it was to discover the past, to bring back the ghosts, and to reflect it dramatically in a way that was historically responsible. I've learned that's a phrase that I've coined.
Historically responsible.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, people would say to me, is this going to be historically accurate? I said, well, it's historically responsible. It happened over 350 years ago.
It's hard.
So there's accounts written, but these are written by people
who have their own opinion.
There's oral tradition.
Right.
And if you've ever played the telephone game Gossip, by the time it gets to the last person in the line, the original message is totally different.
Skewed,
so over time, things are passed down. And probably one of the greatest bits of advice I got was the late Chief Sturgis of the Mohegan tribe. And he said to me, all right, kid, because he was a lot older.
That's how he talks to people, yeah.
Yeah, and I was a lot younger, and he was a lot older. And he said to me, each guy's going to tell you the story the way he wants you to believe it. And he said, having said that, here's our side. And I liked it because he was honest about it. And so, yeah, everybody did kind of tell me their side with an angle that they wanted me to accept. And Kevin basically gave me what the artifacts had to say. And artifacts don't lie.
Right.
So by being historically responsible, I tried not to take one side or the other. But when I had to create the different factions, for example, with the Pequots in the sachem of the Pequot Sassacus, I had to think like the Pequots might have thought. I had to put my mind in sync with Sassacus.
In a cultural, just imagining that you are them.
Yeah, I had to do that with Uncas of the Mohegans, because one of the questions was, Was he a Pequot trader or a Mohegan patriot? I had to think like John Mason. I had to think like Captain Underhill, whose account of the Pequot War is probably the one that I like the most, because he was the one that spoke of women and children being in the fort. Mason's account kind of left out that little detail. And Lieutenant Lyon Gardner, his account, Philip Vincent, he was like a recorder back then. So through a fictitious descendant of Philip Vincent, I used him as like a narrator in the story.
Nice.
And so in any case, when the issue resurfaced again last year, I knew I wasn't done with John Mason. And so I applied for a grant to the state of Connecticut, and I said, here's what I want to do. I want to take my old play and adapt it into a solo performer piece. I will play every single role. I would never have thought of that if not for the night that Chaz Palminteri was at the Guard, recreating his solo performer piece that triggered the movie A Bronx Tale. It was originally a play, but it was one person performing all the roles. It became a screenplay in a movie when Robert De Niro happened to be in the audience of this little theater in New York, fascinated by it, told Palminteri, go ahead, write the screenplay, you play Sonny the mobster, I'll direct it, I'll play the kid's father, and we'll do the story from the point of view of the boy. And so that became like a cult classic. It's one of the best, gangster films ever. Well, at the age of 69, I think he's now about 70, 71, Chaz Palminteri, he was on the Guard stage with the vitality and verve of a teenager.
Wow.
And so having seen that, it was only a few weeks later, I thought, can I do that with my play? Can I turn it into a one-performer piece? That would be me. Play the various roles which 12 actors played before. So I was awarded a grant because my appeal to the state was that I wanted to put forth a responsible representation of the Pequot War and the burning of the Mystic Fort and Major Mason's role in it, and let the play speak for me. I wanted to say to people, I'm not going to try to persuade you one way or the other. You come watch the performance, and then you think what you will.
Right.
Because I've laid out everything that happened back then.
But I want to know, what's the takeaway? What did people think? Did they hold Mason in contempt for what happened, his part of it? Or?
Well, what a lot of people came away realizing was that the issue was not so black and white and not so simplistic as both sides tend to make it.
Right.
That, and again, it was a clash of cultures, and it was tragic. It comes down to what Rodney King once said, can't we all just get along?
Right.
Evidently, we cannot.
Well, hopefully we can. I mean, I still hold, like that North Star. Like.
Oh, I still hope, too.
Right. And I just believe that we have to be that way. And, I don't want an Armageddon, right? Like, I want things to be peaceful and calm and,
Well, every now and then there is a Gandhi, there is a Carl Sagan.
Absolutely.
There are great minds that pass through, Benjamin Franklin, who once said, there's nothing that a table full of people filled with common sense cannot resolve.
That's right.
The common sense, of course, being the key phrase there.
And
but
isn't he the one that said common sense is not so common as well? Right. So,
you have people like Dr. Jane Goodall. You have these wonderful minds.
Absolutely.
As long as they are present and they continue to surface, then I think there's hope. But what I wanted to do was...
Well, if I can just interrupt for a second or interject, I just think it's so important that we hear from those voices. And don't you think there's a responsibility at some point that people who do have that kind of vision or purpose or insight are doing what you're doing, of telling the story and being out there and spreading truth and having people do that problem solving? Well,
yeah, I found one of the many figures that I found inspirational was the German playwright Bertolt Brecht, whose purpose in theater, he says, yes, I want you engaged, I even want you entertained, but I want you leaving the theater thinking about what you saw. And if that can provoke social change, then by all means do so. So I was, Tolkien said, just tell a cracking good tale. And I agree with that. it's got to be dynamic and exciting for people to want to watch it. But people have to think about what they saw. And that's what I'm trying to do with anything that I write. I want you engaged and caught up in it.
Absolutely.
But when it's over, I want you to go, you know what, I want to think about what I just read.
Well, and that's what I know with storytelling. There always has to be like this aha moment, like something happens that what you thought just all of a sudden is just shifted, maybe slightly, but you have a new perspective, a new nuanced.
Let me give you an interesting example. When I did the performance, there were a couple, and there might be more. I will perform this. If there's an invitation to go to a school or a community event or something and resurrect this performance, and people feel there's value in it, I will do it. Well, we did it again in December. I was hoping to do it in the Garden Mezzanine, but it was all booked. So the Linden Public Library is always open to something.
New London's library is amazing.
Fantastic
yes.
library. Mm-hmm. Young gentleman there that is in charge of the events, Tom Kramer. Okay. He's wonderful. So he set it up. So right around, I think it was December 10th, I did a presentation there. We had a lot of people in that big community room. But here's the story based on what we were talking about. One of my writing students, Steve Burt, I call him Bear because he's a big rugged guy.
Yep.
And he had a friend who drove him over. And his friend was all the way over. I don't care about history. I don't want to go. I'm only doing this because you need a ride. I don't want to have anything to do with history. It's past. Well, about intermission time, he gets up and he goes over to Bear and he said, I can't believe this. We haven't learned anything yet. Look at what happened then. We're making all the same mistakes, and this play is showing what we keep doing over and over again. I can't believe it's happening. And Bear looked at him. He said, I thought you weren't interested. He goes, oh, shut up. He says, when do we go back in? And he said the guy just kept talking about it. And I thought, if I can reach someone, if the play can reach someone that comes in saying, what am I here for? And then knows what he was there for. Afterwards, there were people, coming up and asking questions. And I thought, they're all leaving with what this play had to say in their minds.
Right.
And I want to quote Jack Lemmon when they did the movie Missing. And he said, look, what's going on in these third world countries, I'd like you to go see this movie and come out of there thinking about it. I don't care what you think, but for God's sake, go to the movie and think about it. I think Sissy Spacek won an Academy Award for that. And Jack Lemmon, it was a very serious role. But
so you're enlightened. You enlighten people by your words and by your ability to.
I hope to.
Yeah.
I hope to.
Well, I think so, right?
There's a lot of people long before me and after that were doing that, and I just hope to join them. I just hope to be among those who've got something to say that people will think about while being engaged in it and say, hey, I'm glad I was there. I got caught up in it, but boy, there's something to think about. So.
Right. And I'm signed up for Howard Zinn's historical. Every day he posts something about something that happened on this day in history and like the enlightened version of it rather than the historically presented one that we got when we were in school. And
well, there's little things that are hidden in these pockets, and I want to open up those pockets. And there's when someone is watching a play or reading a book or something, and they just go, I didn't know this. You watch the movie Gettysburg, what I consider the most historically accurate film I've ever seen in my life. And I'm marveling at how Colonel Chamberlain led that bayonet charge down Little Round Top. And I said, when I studied the Civil War in school, I never even heard of Colonel Chamberlain. Yet he practically saved the day for the Battle of Gettysburg with that heroic charge. And there's things like that. History is very exciting.
It's very exciting, especially have somebody like you who's bringing it up and finding the actual documents and the things that you can read that are actually part of the history.
Well, I had a seminar last summer where I performed just a portion of the play. It was over at what's now called the Old Mystic Research Center. It used to be the Indian Colonial Research Center. But that day featured Dr. Kevin McBride. And he kept saying, he said, no, I'll do the seminar. And I was at the table with myself and Dale Plummer, the Norwich historian. He goes, Nick, who's going to come besides You, me, Dale, and my Yukon students.
I was there. That place
yeah.
was packed. There were like 200 people.
Yeah.
I mean,
I told him, I quoted Field of Dreams. I said, Kevin,
Build it.
people will come. And as you saw them, the fire marshal would have thrown a hissy if he'd been there.
I know.
They were coming, and I said, Kevin,
we needed more chairs, standing room
people
only.
will come.
Yes.
And he goes, point made. And so you were there, and what a
It was phenomenal.
fantastic presenter he is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you've written 4 novels, and your books are available at the Yukon Bookstore.
Well, The Legend of Kwai Coast.
This is the one that you want to talk about. Okay.
Yeah, that's available there. The Saga of Marathon was. My 4 novels were done through traditional publishers.
Okay.
I found them in the novel and short story writers market. And this latest one, there's a New York publisher, a medium-sized house called the Wild Rose Press. And they're wonderful. They've got a good-sized staff. And when I first sent the Saga of Marathon, I knew that had a really good chance because they had a historical division, and it went very well. That book is going to resurface again. I'm proud of what it's accomplished and what it can, because it deals with Philippides, who ran from the battlefield of Marathon to Athens, the 26 miles, which is based on the marathon distance. He ran from Marathon to Athens to warn the city that, yes, we have defeated the invading Persian army, but they got on their ships and they're sailing around the coast. Philippides was on a Paul Revere mission, a young guy, to warn the city, yes, victory, but the Persians are coming. And it was to get them alerted to the fact that a force is coming down here and get a standing group together to repel them while the army force marches back. And that was not only the world's first democracy, but if King Darius had in fact succeeded and wiped out Athens, he would have gone through the entire Hellespont, which is what Greece was known as then, and the entire Greek culture, all those great names, Socrates, we never would have heard of them. They would have been either beheaded or sent to Persia, and democracy would have died. There would have, so he was on a mission to save democracy from a despot who was bent on destroying this concept of rule of the people. Now, things haven't changed entirely, so there's a relevance to today's world, too.
Okay.
And the idea that there are individuals out there who do not like free thinking, do not like the idea that the people will make decisions, that an oligarchy doesn't get to determine things for everybody. Having said that, though, when I sent this one, this was a book that began many, many years ago. I wrote it a long time ago, and it was about a rebellious young dolphin.
Okay, if I can just interrupt real quick.
Sure.
The Legend of Kwai Coast, and Kwai Coast is a fictional place.
Yes.
And it's, if it was in a place, it would be around San Francisco in the Bay Area, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead with.
It was my way of saying that they're this pod of dolphins. It's a clan that's very unusual.
Well, dolphins are such amazing animals too, so intelligent. And
incredibly intelligent. And the works of Jacques Cousteau basically is what inspired it.
Sure.
And what triggered this, and I talked about this at Bank Square Books when I gave a presentation this past October, Jacques Cousteau and his son Philippe and their crew were diving. And again, Jacques Cousteau is to the sea what Carl Sagan is to outer space.
Absolutely.
He's a genius. And there's people that don't know who he was. I think this is tragic. This man was the greatest pioneer of the ocean. They were diving, and they said near a coral reef, he called it a dolphin congress. There was a small group of dolphins sitting with their dorsal part against the wall, sitting up.
Just having a conversation.
Yeah. And he called it the Dolphin Congress.
I love that.
And said he had never seen anything like that ever, never saw anything like it again. And it got me to thinking, I already was in love with marine sciences and the ocean and everything. And he said that they were probably determining something to do with their clan, with their group. So I came up with this story.
Well, I want to read it. That would be great.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah.
The idea was that it's a reclusive clan, which is very unusual for dolphins. They stayed in this quiet little cove. That's why KWI, Kauai Coast. It was a quiet little coast. It was just on the continental shelf, not romping through the sea like dolphins normally do. And there's a rebellious young dolphin named Piper, and she challenges these very rigid mores of the fanatical pod leader, who is convinced there is another species, another race coming for them.
Oh.
And they're called the snagtooth. And the dolphins call themselves the whistling fin because of the whistling sounds they make. The snagtooth are sharks.
Sure.
And the Commodore Ramstrong, I refer to him. Again, it's a young adult novel with a very strong appeal to adults.
Now, is this part of anybody's curriculum? Is anybody in school systems, are they buying into some of your books?
I wish they would. I wish they would. And it's ironic you mentioned that. One of my young students, I called her the Ocelot, and her name, Jolie Eisenberg. She was in my program, the short story writing program that I teach for the town of Groton Parks and Rec.
Okay.
And she's been published. She worked very hard. So she was with me from the time she was about 13. She eventually went to the Marine Magnet School and fell in love with marine sciences.
Absolutely, yeah.
And is a marine science major now at Avery Point. And she read it, and you know what? I should have brought it with me. She did these illustrations
Beautiful.
of all the characters.
Nice.
And I should have brought it with me because they were just beautiful. And she said I couldn't help but do these illustrations. So,
well, Nick, you're on Facebook, right? And if anybody wants to reach out to you, Facebook is really the way.
Yeah, just go to Nicholas P. Checker, and I can be found there. But
did you post the pictures?
Oh yeah, this is on there because when the Avery Point bookstore decided to stock the shelves with this, people can go to the Avery Point UConn bookstore and also buy it there. And I thought, hey, I'm an alumnus of UConn. I was there for a semester at Avery Point. You know, I spent most of my time at the main branch. And I thought, well, it'd be kind of nice if, you know, I've got this story I wrote, marine science based, and I attended a semester, I think maybe 2 semesters there, but I was at the main branch. But I did go there. Gee, maybe it'd be nice if you put my book in your store.
Yeah, no kidding.
But when I introduced this at Bank Square Books, where the year before I had the famous Boston Marathon winner, Amby Burfoot, do the intro to the crowd.
Nice.
Well, I chose Jolie.
Nice.
I said if she were a dolphin, she'd be like Piper. She'd be something like my main character.
Right.
And I thought, who better
That's perfect.
to give the introduction to the crowd than my young student? And she was just, I said, yeah, I want you.
What an honor.
And she gave a terrific presentation.
I'm sure she did.
So, but the thing is, again, this is a story about the voice of youth.
Well, sometimes youth, young adults, they see things from a different lens, and we've been talking about that perception, and it's not all black and white, and just they have insight that we're not aware of because we're so focused on whatever the status quo is, perhaps. So,
well, it's something I learned in many younger years, and people say, "What did you learn most from college?" I said, to think, not just to accept what I'm being told, but to question and to understand if what I'm being spoon-fed is actually the truth, which takes me back to Elegy for an Icon. It was, and I had a great teacher named Mr. Cook, my freshman year at UConn, English teacher, and he once, when we got our first test, we wrote down everything he said, and he threw them in the wastebasket and went up on the board and drew a picture of a parrot. He said, "That's what I have in here, parrots. I have been in here telling every one of you what I think, and on your test you have repeated to me what I think. Why do I need you to tell me that? I am fully aware of that. I have no idea what any of you think about these stories."
I love that.
And that's when I realized,
This is like a nation of sheep, right?
yeah, what he wanted us to learn, to think for ourselves, and to give our own interpretation, but to support it too. Here's what you think of the story. Why?
I did the same thing when I worked in the schools. It was like, you know, you have your opinion, but what are the facts to support your opinion?
Yeah.
And if you can defend whatever you're saying or thinking, then that makes you all the better. So I don't know if you know, but I teach or facilitate a writing group in East Lyme, and I'm so proud of my group. They sometimes, some of them will come in, they're like, I can't write, but then they start writing. And they recall these really, in my opinion, almost sacred images of their previous years as when they were younger, quintessential moments in their lives when one of their children was born or something like that. Why is writing important, do you think, especially for people as we age? How can you speak to that?
Well, I think it's important because I ran programs through Learn, and then it was called Project Learn back then. There was a grant I taught in every school system you can imagine here, from first grade, well, right on up through college. These creative writing programs, and you're not only expressing yourself, but you're putting down on paper what you're thinking. You've got a recorded, you've got a record of what you have to say, and you can do it with nonfiction. You can do it in essay. You can do it in poetry. You can do it through stories. But people, as I've told my writing students, when you get published, like there's a couple little literary magazines out on the West Coast, one in particular, that's been open to my students, my adult students sending stories, and they're getting published because of that. But I've told them, I said, look at it this way, you've written a story, and now it gets published. People that you may never even know in your life, people that you may never have a conversation with, are going to read what you have to say.
It's leaving a legacy.
Yeah, they're going to be thinking about what you have to say. And frankly, if people say, I cannot write, can you think? Because if you can think, you can write.
Right.
All you're doing when you're writing is putting down what you're thinking.
Exactly. And the thing that I find too is that it awakens the brain. They recall memories, and you know, of course I use the prompts of smelling, touching, feeling, tasting, things like that to bring about the...
That's the whole essence. I call it the factor, SSSTT. Sight, sound, scent, touch, taste, and then the most important one, thought. See, where the novelist and the fiction writer has an advantage in that the fiction writer can crawl inside the mind of a character. We live it through the character. Not, you know, in screenwriting and in film, we're seeing it, and we're getting it through images. In plays, we're getting it through dialogue and some movement. But in the book, we are crawling right inside the mind of the characters.
I love that.
One of the things I've often said to people is, you open the book or the story, you start reading it, and if it's well done, this invisible pair of fingers comes up out of the page, these bony fingers. They grab you by the back of the neck, pull you inside the pages and say, you're mine, and you're not getting out till I let you out. You know, so.
All right, Nick, thank you so much for being on my show. Always a pleasure to be with you, to hear what you have to say. So please come back. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate.